Hello, I'm Rick Anthony, and this is Opinion. For better or worse, right or wrong, everybody has opinions about somebody or something. With us today to share their opinions are Jake Abel, Republican Commissioner of Radnor Township's 6th Ward, and David Falcone, candidate for Radnor School Board. Gentlemen, how are you today?
Hey, Rick. Morning. Great to be back with you.
The topic is whether a governing body that has control over an entity of one type or another is good, bad, or indifferent for a community. In other words, a one-party rule. Gentlemen, what's your opinion? Jake, let's start with you.
Well, Rick, very interesting question. Obviously, at the end of the day, an election is about the will of the people. And, over the last couple of years in Radnor Township, we've seen a shift to a one-party system, or at least, a supermajority as the Board of Commissioners is currently organized. And where I think that has fallen and been seen as a negative for the township is that not everyone feels their voices are being heard. And that's where we come down to, and that's why this election in November is so important, because there's half the community goes day by day thinking that their voices aren't being heard, and that that there's a movement in one direction, where in a small community like ours, we should be having compromises and discussions on big issues.
Jake, it's a 7-member board, right?
Correct.
5 Democrats and 2 Republicans. Have you felt during your term that you've been shut out? Have you felt that you haven't had the opportunity to express yourself and the opinions of your constituents on the various issues, whether it's budget or projects or whatever? Yeah,
and I think Dave probably has a similar experience. Dave served on a board that was 5-4 party makeup, and I've served on a board previously that was 4 Democrats, 3 Republicans, where there was a lot more discussion and compromise, and you had to have that because to get big issues passed through the board. I've seen over the last 2 years with a 5-2 makeup that on big issues, I'm not even consulted, or issues aren't even discussed with me. They're passed through party line votes.
Dave, let's talk about your opinion. You were on the school board for how long and when?
I was on the board for 4 years. 4 years ago was my last year. So this cycle will be kind of one full cycle since I was last on.
You're a glutton for punishment, Dave.
I am a glutton for punishment. It's what happens when you've got a bunch of little kids in the system, right? You're connected to it, and what happens on the system has direct impact on what's going on. So I've got 4 little ones, Rick, and it matters for sure. So like Jake said, I had the opportunity actually to serve on a board that was at first Democrat-led, and then halfway through it swung to Republican-led. And to Jake's point, both of those boards were pretty tightly held. I think it was a 5-4 Democrat and then maybe a 6-3 Republican. And we got a lot done because of the ability to work across, the aisle, per se. It was an important initiative. When I came on, I can say, I was on a board even my first 2 years where there was collaboration across, for sure. I was a product of that collaboration. And then when 2 years through, the same thing happened. We felt it was important to make sure that we got buy-in across the aisle and across political views and personal views. So it was a good experience, but I can tell you kind of the current board as it sits right now is 9-0 Democrat. I haven't had the experience to serve on that board, but I think Jake said it best. No matter which side the pendulum swings to, it's important to have that other voice. And you'll hear some dialogue now. Well, this board might be 9-0, but we definitely debate issues. And it goes beyond that, I think, Rick, right? It goes to whether or not there's a broad base of the community that feels like their voice is
Yeah.
being heard inside the room when those discussions are happening. So certainly we would expect, all folks that serve on a board to have differing opinions and to share those opinions. That's the nature of the beast, but it's about making sure that everybody in the community feels as if their opinions are represented in that discussion. And that's where, one party rule can
Yes.
go kind of off the rails.
There was a recent controversial issue with which I'm sure you're familiar, and that's had to do with the mascot, the Radnor Raiders, right? Whether the image should be eliminated. And that went back and forth. It came back to the board, I think, at least twice. And the board finally made a decision, then held its original decision. What's your opinion on that particular controversy and the dominance of one party?
Well, I think, to the point of our discussion, I think there needs to be more voices in the room. I know for sure that there is an engaged community around the issue. Look, it maybe wasn't a great time to entertain that discussion in the middle of a pandemic when there were really pressing issues facing the district and facing our community and certainly facing our globe that required a lot of attention and a lot of effort. But I can tell you for sure that just right on my street, there are people that are very sensitive to the issue of the mascot, and they want to see it fleshed out in a proper forum, and they want to have their voices heard because it's a very meaningful thing to them, and it's a very meaningful thing to a broad-based portion of our community. It's something that deserves discussion, and it deserves attention.
And do you feel that the current board shut it down? Because there was testimony, their opinions were expressed, et cetera, and again, the board came to the same conclusion.
Right. So what
should they have done differently?
Well, so I'm kind of not in the position to judge what they've done because it's over with now. But what I can tell you is there are people in the community that feel their voice wasn't heard. Mm-hmm. So if that's the case, then perhaps it could have been a better discussion. Perhaps there could have been more opportunity to field options. I can tell you when I was on the board, we faced similar issues. Issues come before every board, and Jake can speak to this. It doesn't always have to be a completely politically charged issue, but there are issues. And there will always be a segment of the community that wants to have their voice heard on that issue. Mm-hmm. And when it's possible, the board should allow that to happen. It's our job as public servants to represent our community and to gather those discussion points before we make decisions, because our decisions ultimately impact a very large portion of our population.
Yeah, and Rick, on that one particular issue, I'm not a member of the school board, but I am a taxpayer, and you should be, if you're going to have a major vote and a major decision within the township, you should at least understand the price that goes along with that. And the work wasn't even done to give the residents an understanding of how much this is going to cost. And that's an important thing that a board should be doing. They should be transparent to the residents on what this is costing them.
Jake, you have several issues about which you feel very, very strong. You have very strong opinions. And among them, making sure that first responders have adequate equipment and resources, parks and recreation, et cetera. Do you feel that you have not been able to represent the wishes of your constituency with regard to those important issues because you shut out? Well,
yeah, to an extent. There's been those decisions because there's been those challenges because if I bring an issue to the board, many times they've tried to sidetrack or derail an initiative I bring forward. But the important thing that I try to do is I hold town hall meetings or nowadays Zoom calls, and I make sure that residents can speak to the township and they can have their positions on record. And let me just say one thing on the importance of making sure voices are heard. Every January, the first vote we take is on the reorg of board leadership. And for 4 years now, I have voted and commented, making sure that people know that I believe our board leadership should be bipartisan. So if you want to have a Democrat as president of the board, you know, I think it's important that a Republican is vice president and vice versa. I've made that a point every year, and it's been disregarded the last 3 years.
Mhm. To be clear on this one point, I think what you're both saying is regardless of political party, no one party should dominate. Is that correct? Maybe dominate is the wrong word, but you get my point.
Well, yeah. Again, an election is the will of the people. But I believe if a board has demonstrated that they're not willing to listen to all residents, then voters, you know, it's the only other alternative is we have to have we have to have equal representation, or you know, we have to have both parties represented, so that you can't drown out half the community.
Yeah, but the counter argument might be that residents have the opportunity to come before the board. They have ways of communicating with the board to make their wishes and their opinions known. Is that not the case?
It's always the case, for sure. And to your point, I think there are dangers, is how I would categorize it, Rick. There are dangers when one party controls all of the seats on a board. I think the dangers are that in some of the executive discussions, there are portions of the community that will feel as if their voice is not being represented there. Now, it is important to note, we are simply a product of an electorate. So if the electorate feels that in Radnor Township, it should be 7 Democrats or 9 Democrats or vice versa, you know, we are a product of that. What I can tell you is, having served on a board, I do think there is value. I think there is real value in having diversity of political party, of background, of ethnicity, of sex, of everything. I think diversity is important because you're forming opinions and you're creating situations that impact such a wide variety of people. And in order to really meet that, to get to that issue, I think you need diversity of opinion.
Jake, one last thought before we close.
No, I agree with everything Dave said here, and I'm really excited that Dave has decided to run again. And the slate of candidates on the school board side that he's running with, you know, they've all committed to working with all residents of the community, regardless of party. And that's what we really need right now. We've got a lot of big issues coming before the school board and the board of commissioners. And the only way that we can better our community is by listening to everyone and making sure everyone feels that they are part of the process.
Jake, David, thank you very much for your opinions.
Thanks, Rick.
Next time, this is Rick Anthony. This is Opinion. Take very good care of yourselves.